The night sky is torn apart by thunder. Lightning flashes across jagged stone towers that rise from the mist like broken teeth. You hear the wind howl through the ruins, carrying with it the faint echo of screams long silenced. A castle stands on the cliff, its walls blackened by centuries of war, its battlements dripping with the blood of forgotten kings. This is not just a monument of stone. It is a prison of souls. Every brick here whispers. Every corridor remembers. And every shadow hides a story darker than death itself. They say British castles are symbols of power, wealth, and majesty. But behind the grand walls and royal banners lies a truth far more chilling. These were places of betrayal, murder, torture, and unholy hauntings. Places where battles painted the ground red, where monarchs lost crowns and lives, where spirits never found peace. Tonight, you and I will walk through those iron gates. We will not see castles as postcards or tourist sites. We will see them as they really are, graveyards of ambition, silent witnesses of blood-soaked history. And when we reach the final story, the one that still sends chills down the spines of ghost hunters and historians alike, you'll realize why some doors in Britain's castles should never, ever be opened. So steel your nerves, keep your eyes wide, and follow me inside. The past is waiting. The night is silent, broken only by the echo of footsteps across damp stone floors. A torch flickers against cold walls, shadows stretching like twisted claws. The camera moves through a long, dark corridor inside a ruined castle, where whispers seem to crawl out of the cracks. The silence is heavy, suffocating, as though the walls themselves remember every scream and betrayal. This is not just stone and mortar. This is memory. And memory here is stained with blood. British castles, towering symbols of power, ambition, and survival. To tourists today, they appear majestic, romantic, even charming. But behind the thick walls and grand towers lies a history drenched in fear. These castles were not built to impress. They were built to defend, to dominate, and to imprison. And within their walls, countless stories unfolded of haunted chambers, bloody sieges, and kings who trusted the wrong people. Imagine standing inside a castle keep at midnight. The wind howls through broken windows. Somewhere in the distance, a door slams shut even though no living soul is there. These are not ghost stories for children. They are tales whispered for centuries, grounded in betrayal, war, and restless spirits that never left. Each castle is a silent witness, a stage where violence and ambition left their scars. Tonight, we journey into the dark history of British castles. From cursed dungeons to ghostly queens who wander the halls in eternal mourning. From kings murdered in their own chambers to bloody battles that drown the land in chaos. Each tale is a thread woven into a tapestry of power and fear. And as we pull these threads apart, we will uncover secrets that were never meant to be told. But beware, the further we go, the more dangerous the stories become. These castles have teeth. And sometimes, the dead do not like their past disturbed. Stay until the very end, because the final tale will reveal a truth so chilling that it will make every shadow around you feel alive. The bloody foundations castles first rose across Britain, not as fairy tale homes, but as brutal machines of war. When William the Conqueror claimed the English crown in 1066, he brought with him not just an army, but a new architecture of control. Norman castles, towering mounds with wooden or stone keeps, sprouted across the landscape like scars, each one a message to the conquered. We are here, and we are watching you. For the people living under their shadow, castles were not protection, they were oppression. From their high towers, lords and kings could spy on villages, collect crushing taxes, and lock away anyone who dared to rebel. The walls were thick, not just to keep enemies out, but to keep prisoners in. And many of those prisoners would never leave alive. Take the Tower of London, one of the most infamous castles in history. Its white walls glisten under the sun, but inside, its past is pitch black. This was where queens lost their heads, where princes vanished, and where screams of the condemned echoed in the dead of night. For every royal who walked proudly into the tower, there was another dragged in chains through its gates. The tower was also a place of betrayal. Richard III's reign was marked by the mysterious disappearance of his young nephews, the famous princes in the tower. Taken in for protection, they were never seen again. Did their uncle order their deaths to secure his throne? The walls remain silent, but many say that at night, the faint laughter of children still drifts from the stones, cut short by sudden silence. But betrayal was not unique to London. Across Britain, castles became cages where ambition devoured loyalty. In Scotland, Edinburgh Castle stood as a fortress of kings, yet it was also a place where family murdered family. James II witnessed nobles being executed in cold blood. The blood of the mighty soaked into the very stones, a warning that power had no friends. And what of those who died defending these mighty walls? At Rochester Castle in 1215, rebels rose against King John. The siege lasted weeks, with tunnels dug under the walls and fires set to bring the towers crashing down. Imagine the fear of defenders as the ground shook beneath them, flames licking at their feet, knowing the enemy's wrath was moments away. The castle fell, but the screams of its last defenders seemed to cling to the air long after. These battles were not just struggles for land, they were struggles for survival. Every arrow fired, every sword swung within those walls carried the weight of destiny. A single betrayal could change the fate of a nation. And so castles became breeding grounds for secrets, where whispers in dark corners could end a king's life before dawn. Dungeons beneath castles were no less terrible. Damp, airless chambers where prisoners wasted away in darkness. Some were tortured for confessions they never gave. Others were left to starve, their cries unanswered. To this day, visitors claim to hear chains dragging along cold stone, or to feel a sudden drop in temperature, as if some unseen prisoner still shares their suffering. Hauntings often follow cruelty. At Barry Pomeroy Castle in Devon, the White Lady is said to wander the ruins. Some claim she is the spirit of Margaret Pomeroy, starved to death in a dungeon by her jealous sister. Her pale figure is seen drifting along the ramparts, her face frozen in eternal sorrow, reminding visitors of the crimes committed not by invaders, but by family. Blood was not just spilled in wars, but also in betrayals of the heart. Castles were dens of intrigue, where royal marriages were tools of power and passion was often deadly. At Chillingham Castle, whispers tell of ghostly lovers and cursed rooms. The castle's dungeon still holds the iron chains of prisoners who never saw freedom again. Guides say their restless cries still echo, demanding release. And yet, despite the cruelty, castles remained symbols of majesty. For peasants who lived in mud huts, these towering fortresses looked like palaces of the gods. But step inside, and the illusion shatters. Behind the grand halls lay secret staircases, murder holes, and trapdoors, every stone designed not for beauty, but for war and betrayal. It is easy to romanticize castles today. Tourists pose for photos, weddings are held in banquet halls, and children play on the lawns. But to those who lived centuries ago, the sight of a castle on the horizon meant only one thing: fear. Fear of attack. Fear of the Lord's wrath. Fear that behind those high walls, their fate might already be sealed. Perhaps that is why the legends of ghosts remain so strong. Because people sense that the past never really left. The cries of the executed, the prayers of the condemned, the rage of the betrayed, they linger, unable to escape the stones that held them. The castle remembers everything, and it forces us to remember too. And so, as we move deeper into this journey, we leave behind the foundations of stone and blood, and step into the darker mysteries. For if Chapter 1 has shown us the violence that birthed these castles, the next chapter will show us the spirits that refuse to rest within them. In the haunted silence of Britain's castles, the dead are never far. And in Chapter 2, we will follow their shadows into the halls where footsteps echo, though no living man walks. The past is not gone. It is waiting, watching, whispering. The haunted walls as night falls, castles change. In the day, they may appear like proud relics of the past, their towers glowing golden under the sun. But once darkness swallows the sky, their walls whisper with secrets. Cold air slips through cracks, doors creak without touch, and footsteps echo in halls long abandoned. The stones that once soaked up blood now seem to exhale it back as shadows. And this is when the ghosts of Britain's castles awaken. Few places are as infamous as Chillingham Castle, often called the most haunted castle in England. Visitors enter expecting to see history. Instead, they find terror. In the dungeon, iron hooks still hang from the walls, reminders of the tortures that once broke men's bodies and spirits. It is here, they say, that the tortured refuse to rest. Guests have reported screams in the night, sudden hands brushing their skin, and the cold, piercing stare of something unseen. But it is not only the dungeon that chills the blood. The Blue Boy of Chillingham is perhaps the castle's most tragic spirit. For years, guests saw a glowing blue light in one chamber, often followed by the cries of a child. When renovation work began, bones were discovered behind a wall, those of a boy buried alive. His restless soul had cried out for centuries, and even today, some swear they hear faint sobs in the silence of night. Further north lies Edinburgh Castle, towering above the Scottish capital. By day, it draws thousands of tourists. By night, it is a fortress of shadows. Soldiers guarding the castle have long reported phantom footsteps marching through the halls, though no one is there. The most chilling tale is of the headless drummer, a ghost said to appear when the castle is under threat. Though centuries have passed, some still claim the sound of distant drumming haunts the air before storms. The dungeons beneath Edinburgh Castle are another world entirely. Prisoners from across Europe were once crammed into these dark pits. Many died nameless, far from home. Their anger, it seems, lingers. Visitors describe being grabbed, shoved, or overwhelmed by sudden despair. Tour guides warn that entering those cells is not for the faint of heart. For once inside, you feel as though the darkness itself watches you. But not all spirits cry out in anger. Some walk in sorrow. Barry Pomeroy Castle in Devon is haunted not by one, but by two ghostly women. The White Lady is thought to be Margaret Pomeroy, locked in a dungeon by her jealous sister and left to starve. She drifts through the castle's ruins, her pale face forever etched with grief. The Blue Lady, on the other hand, is said to lure men into danger, leading them into dark corners from which they never return. The Tower of London remains the crown jewel of haunted castles. Its long, bloody history left behind more than enough restless souls. Anne Boleyn, executed by her husband Henry VIII, is said to walk headless through the tower's chapel, carrying her severed head. The two young princes, locked in and never seen again, are said to giggle faintly in the dark. And in the White Tower, guards speak of sudden terror, as though a presence far stronger than them forces them to flee. One of the most terrifying tales from the tower is that of Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury. She was an elderly woman accused of treason, dragged to the execution block. But she refused to die quietly. When the axe fell, she broke free, running screaming across the scaffold until she was hacked down. They say her final screams echo through the tower on certain nights, carried by a wind colder than steel. At Dover Castle, ghostly soldiers still stand watch. Built to defend England's shores, its walls have seen centuries of war. Today, visitors report hearing battle cries in the distance or seeing phantom soldiers patrol the battlements. One famous tale tells of a drummer boy murdered for carrying a message. His spirit still drums along the tunnels, warning of danger that never arrives. Leap Castle in Ireland, though outside Britain, its shadow looms large in Celtic history, holds one of the darkest spirits of all, the Elemental. Described as a foul, monstrous figure with rotting flesh and the stench of death, it is said to appear before great misfortune. Unlike sorrowful queens or lost soldiers, the Elemental is pure malice, feeding on fear itself. Many who have seen it never return to the castle again. These hauntings are not simply folklore. Across centuries, noblemen, soldiers, priests, and modern tourists alike have sworn to witness them. The consistency of these tales suggests something powerful clings to these walls. Are they the restless dead? Or are castles themselves alive, absorbing human suffering and replaying it like a broken record? Skeptics claim the hauntings are tricks of the mind, the wind whistling through cracks, shadows moving under candlelight, imagination fueled by fear. Yet those who spend a night within these castles often leave with haunted eyes. Many refuse to ever return, convinced that what they saw was no trick, but a brush with the other side. It is easy to forget that these ghosts are not faceless. They were once men and women, betrayed, executed, or abandoned. Their love, fear, and pain remain carved into the stone. Anne Boleyn's heartbreak, Margaret Pomeroy's starvation, the Blue Boy's terror. These are not stories, but memories, bleeding through time. And the hauntings are not limited to the famous. Even the smallest ruins hold secrets. A crumbled tower in Wales might conceal the ghost of a forgotten knight. A lonely keep in Northumberland might echo with the cry of a widow. Every castle, no matter how obscure, has its tale. To dismiss them is to ignore centuries of whispered warnings. Why do these spirits linger? Some say they are trapped by violent death, their souls unable to find peace. Others believe they remain because of unfinished business, clinging to the places where betrayal stole their lives. And some claim the castles themselves are prisons for the dead, holding them as firmly as they once held the living. But perhaps the most chilling thought is this: the ghosts are not just memories. They are watching. They know when you enter their halls, when you breathe their air, when you step across the same stones where they bled. Visitors often speak of being followed by unseen eyes, of whispers at their back. The line between past and present vanishes in these walls. In some castles, the spirits even seem to grow stronger with time. As centuries pass, their presence does not fade, it intensifies. Guides at Chillingham swear that the more people visit, the louder the spirits become, as though feeding on the energy of the living. If true, then our fascination with castles might be keeping the dead alive. And yet, people keep coming. They bring cameras, recorders, and courage, hoping to capture proof. Many leave with more than photographs. Sudden scratches on the skin, objects moving without touch, nightmares that begin the same night they visited. The castles take something from each visitor, a piece of fear to add to their endless collection. The question remains, are these hauntings warnings or punishments? Do the ghosts seek justice, or do they simply enjoy tormenting those who trespass? No answer has ever been found. But one truth cannot be denied. Once you step inside these walls, you are never truly alone. And so, we leave behind the haunted shadows. But not for long. For in the next chapter, we will move deeper into the betrayal that fueled these spirits. Ghosts are born from tragedy, and tragedy in castles was often born from one thing: royal betrayal. And the blood of kings and queens has left stains no ghost can wash away. Royal betrayals behind every stone wall and iron gate. Castles were not just fortresses, they were political traps. They became chessboards where kings, queens, and nobles plotted moves that could make or destroy empires. And betrayal was the deadliest piece on the board. The blood that stained castle floors was not always spilled by enemy swords. More often, it was spilled by family hands. The Tower of London stands as the stage for one of the most infamous betrayals in history: the fate of the two princes. Edward V and his younger brother Richard were placed in the tower for their protection in 1483. Instead of safety, the walls became their tomb. Their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was crowned Richard III. The boys disappeared, never seen again. Were they smothered in their sleep? Poisoned? Starved? The truth is buried in whispers, but the betrayal remains eternal. But betrayal within castles was not limited to uncles and nephews. It was husbands against wives, kings against queens. Henry VIII turned his palace of love into a chamber of execution. His second wife, Anne Boleyn, once adored and crowned queen, was accused of treason and adultery. In 1536, within the tower's cold stone, she was beheaded. Her husband ordered it, her courtiers cheered it, and her ghost walks forever, holding her severed head. The same king betrayed Catherine Howard, his fifth wife, who was dragged screaming to the block at the tower. She cried for mercy, pleading for her life, but Henry gave none. Her desperate footsteps are said to echo through Hampton Court Palace, known as the Haunted Gallery, where she ran toward the King's Chapel to beg forgiveness. She never reached him. In Scotland, betrayal reached new heights within Edinburgh Castle. Mary, Queen of Scots, imprisoned by her own cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, was forced into a life of suspicion and confinement. Her own nobles turned against her, her marriages crumbled in plots, and eventually she was executed, her blood staining another castle's soil. But the betrayal that stung deepest was that of kin, for family was supposed to protect, yet instead delivered her to death. Warwick Castle, once a symbol of noble loyalty, became a place where alliances crumbled like rotting stone. Richard Neville, the Kingmaker, played both sides during the Wars of the Roses. From his stronghold, he betrayed kings and crowns alike, switching loyalty whenever it gave him power. In the end, he died on the battlefield, betrayed himself by the very cause he thought he controlled. His ghost, they say, still paces the battlements, restless, furious, never satisfied. Then there is the tale of Alnwick Castle, where betrayal came in the form of false hospitality. Guests would be welcomed into the hall, only to find poisoned cups or daggers in the dark. Lords who sat together as allies one day could wake up as prisoners the next. Within those halls, smiles were often sharper than swords, and betrayal was the most common feast. One of the darkest betrayals in Welsh history unfolded at Conwy Castle. Here, Prince Dafydd ap Gruffydd betrayed his brother, the great Welsh leader Llywelyn the Last. Driven by ambition, Dafydd sided with Edward I of England, only to later be betrayed himself, captured, and executed in brutal fashion. His fate serves as proof that betrayal may win castles, but it rarely wins peace. Castles were built on loyalty sworn through oaths. Yet oaths meant little in the face of ambition. Knights turned on lords, lords turned on kings. Even the closest allies plotted in secret. Within castle walls, alliances were fragile threads, and one whispered promise could tear kingdoms apart. Consider the betrayal at Pontefract Castle, where King Richard II was imprisoned in 1399. His cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, seized the crown and left Richard to starve to death within his own fortress. Once a king, now a prisoner of betrayal. His ghostly cries are said to echo from the ruins, a reminder of the crown that was stolen through treachery. Even noble families were not safe. Brothers killed brothers, sons turned on fathers, and daughters poisoned mothers to inherit land and titles. At Berkeley Castle, the cruelest betrayal was committed against King Edward II. He was imprisoned there after being deposed by his own wife, Queen Isabella, and her lover, Roger Mortimer. His death was horrific, a red-hot poker forced into his body so no wounds would show. The betrayal was not only political, it was personal, intimate, unforgettable. Such betrayals echo through time because they were not merely about power. They were about trust broken at its deepest level. Castles that should have been sanctuaries became traps. Walls meant to guard became cages. The very places where kings and queens were supposed to feel safest became the arenas of their destruction. And yet, betrayal always carried a price. The blood of the betrayed soaked into the earth, and their restless spirits rose. The princes haunt the tower, and Bolin roams the chapel. Edward II's screams are said to echo in Berkeley's cold halls. The betrayed refuse to leave, their presence a curse upon the stones. But perhaps the most terrifying thought is that betrayal is endless. As one life was taken, another plotted revenge. The cycle never stopped. Castles became theaters of betrayal, staging one tragedy after another, as though cursed to repeat themselves for eternity. At Warwick, whispers still float that the kingmaker regrets his treachery. At the Tower, the ghosts of queens stare silently as if questioning every visitor. Whom do you trust? In castles, the dead do not forgive, and betrayal becomes eternal. Even today, historians pore over documents, trying to untangle the web of lies woven within castle walls. But each story ends the same way, with broken oaths, shattered trust, and blood on the stone floors. The walls may stand, but the truth remains buried with those who paid the price. Visitors often say they feel uneasy in royal chambers, as though the air itself carries judgment. Perhaps it is because betrayal is not just history, it is emotion, preserved forever in the stones. A king's last breath, a queen's final prayer, a child's terrified cry. All linger, replaying themselves in endless silence. Royal betrayal was not only the end of lives, it was the end of dynasties. The Wars of the Roses, born of lies and ambition, reshaped Britain. And every betrayal had its castle, every broken oath its chamber. The walls were silent witnesses, watching empires collapse from within. And so, betrayal joins blood and hauntings as the foundation of castle history. It is impossible to speak of these fortresses without speaking of treachery. For castles were not just built on stone, they were built on lies, ambition, and broken trust. But betrayal, haunting, and blood are not the end of the story. For castles were not only places of war and murder, they were also stages for sieges, battles where fire, famine, and fear tore through stone walls. And in the next chapter, we march into the roar of war itself, into the sieges that turned castles into living hells. Bloody sieges castles were not built for peace. Their towering walls, moats, and battlements were designed for one purpose: war. And nothing tested a castle's strength more brutally than a siege. Unlike swift battles on open fields, sieges dragged on for weeks, months, sometimes years. Inside the walls, defenders starved and prayed. Outside, attackers waited, watching, plotting. For both sides, time itself was the cruelest weapon. One of the earliest and bloodiest sieges in England was at Rochester Castle in 1215. Rebel barons had seized the fortress against King John. In response, John's army surrounded it, determined to starve the rebels out. The defenders held for weeks until John ordered tunnels dug beneath the walls. Into those tunnels, his men drove pigs, not for food, but for fire. The fat from the pigs was set ablaze, creating an inferno that collapsed the keep. Imagine the ground shaking, the air choking with smoke, as the defenders screamed inside their crumbling walls. Yet even after the walls fell, the rebels refused to surrender. Starved, burned, and outnumbered, they fought on until only a handful remained. John, furious at their resistance, wanted them executed. But fate spared them. His enemies insisted on mercy. Still, Rochester's ruins stood as a warning. Castles could not only protect, they could trap. Sieges were not only battles of strength, they were battles of hunger. At Kenilworth Castle in 1266, one of the longest sieges in English history, dragged on for nearly 6 months. Thousands of men surrounded the castle, cutting off food and supplies. Inside, defenders chewed on leather, drank foul water, and watched children waste away. Hunger gnawed deeper than any sword, And when surrender finally came, it was not from defeat in battle, but from the slow, relentless hand of famine. Castles in Wales saw their share of blood as well. Carnarvon Castle, one of Edward I's mighty fortresses, stood as a symbol of English dominance. Yet time and again, Welsh rebels besieged its walls, throwing their fury against the king's stone machine. Imagine the sound of Welsh war cries echoing in the night, arrows clattering against towers, while terrified soldiers inside whispered prayers in the dark. Scotland, too, was no stranger to bloody sieges. Stirling Castle, perched high on volcanic rock, was a prize worth dying for. During the Wars of Scottish Independence, it changed hands multiple times. Each siege was fiercer than the last, with ladders, battering rams, and catapults hurling stones the size of boulders. When the English took it, the Scots came back. When the Scots took it, the English returned. Stirling's walls were stained with centuries of blood, its stones cracked with the weight of war. Perhaps the most haunting siege of all was that of Dunbar Castle in 1338. Agnes Randolph, known as Black Agnes, defended the fortress against English forces. For months, she taunted the attackers, mocking their efforts as stones and fire battered her walls. When they sent catapults, she wiped the dust from her dress and laughed. When they brought siege engines, she ordered her maids to sweep the damage away. Her courage turned a siege of terror into a legend of defiance. But even legends leave scars, and Dunbar's ruins still whisper of the struggle. Sieges were also battles of terror. At Carisbrooke Castle, prisoners once drank their own urine to survive as enemies closed in. At Carlisle Castle, invaders cut off supplies until rats became a delicacy. These were not noble battles of knights in shining armor. These were struggles for survival, where hunger, thirst, and disease killed more than swords. The weapons of sieges were brutal. Catapults hurled stones that crushed towers. Trebuchets launched firepots that set roofs ablaze. Siege towers rolled slowly forward, groaning under the weight of soldiers ready to pour into the walls. And beneath the earth, miners dug tunnels, filling them with fire to collapse stone foundations. The defenders never knew if death would come from above, below, or within. Inside, defenders poured boiling oil on attackers, dropped stones from murder holes, and fired arrows until their fingers bled. Women and children carried buckets of water to quench flames or patch cracks in the walls. Every soul within a castle became part of the battle. Every breath spent in desperate hope that dawn would bring relief. But dawn often brought more horror. Imagine waking to see the enemy still there, their banners unmoving, their fires still burning. The knowledge that they would not leave, that each day would grow worse, ate at the heart of every defender. Siege was not only war of weapons, it was war of the mind. At Bamburgh Castle, the weight of siege broke even kings. In 1464, during the Wars of the Roses, Bamburgh became the first English castle to fall to cannon fire. The thunder of guns shook the air, blasting through stone that had stood for centuries. As walls crumbled, so too did the old world of medieval warfare. Cannons made even the mightiest fortresses vulnerable, and the age of stone towers slowly began to die. Yet even as gunpowder rose, betrayal within sieges remained as deadly as swords. Many castles did not fall by force, but by treachery. Gates opened in the night, guards bribed or tricked, and enemies slipping inside under the cover of darkness. For all their strength, castles could still be undone by a whisper in the dark. Sieges were remembered not for victory alone, but for cruelty. At York, during the English Civil War, civilians were trapped inside with soldiers as cannon fire shook the city. Children starved, disease spread, and corpses piled up in the streets. When the siege finally ended, relief came too late for many. The walls had kept the enemy out, but became a prison of death for those within. Every castle that survived a siege bore scars. Cracked walls, burned gates, rebuilt towers. But the deeper scars were invisible, the memory of fear. Visitors today may see only ruins, but if you listen carefully, some say you can still hear the thunder of catapults, the clash of steel, or the low moan of the starving. Legends of these sieges became ghost stories. At Rochester, screams of the rebels still echo in the night. At Kenilworth, shadows linger in empty chambers, reminders of the 6 months of hunger. At Stirling, phantom soldiers march across the battlements, their battle unfinished. Sieges never truly ended. They simply replay themselves in the silence. And so castles became more than fortresses. They became tombs of the hungry, stages of defiance, and monuments of cruelty. Each siege was a story carved into stone, a reminder that walls may protect, but they also condemn. But behind every siege, every starvation, every act of courage or betrayal, lay the same truth. Castles demanded blood. The more powerful the fortress, the more violent the struggle to claim it. And those who survived often lived not in triumph, but in haunting silence. The ruins we see today are not peaceful remnants. They are scars, each stone heavy with the memory of fire and famine. To walk their walls is to walk with the dead, soldiers who fought, children who starved, lords who plotted. Their presence lingers, refusing to fade, and if sieges showed the world the fury of battle, the next chapter will reveal the cruelty that followed. For after the fighting ended, the dungeons waited, and within those cold, airless chambers, castles showed their darkest face, a face of torture, screams, and endless chains. Torture and dungeons. If the towers of castles were built to inspire awe, then the dungeons were built to crush the human spirit. Hidden beneath layers of stone, they were dark, airless pits where daylight never reached. Once a prisoner was dragged down the narrow stairs and the door slammed shut, freedom was no longer a possibility. What awaited instead was suffering, long, merciless, and often final. The Tower of London, the most infamous prison in Britain, earned its reputation through centuries of torment. Beneath its grand walls, nobles, queens, and traitors were held in chains. Some entered as powerful figures. They left only as corpses. The rack, a device of pure cruelty, was housed here. Limbs were tied to rollers at each end, stretched until joints snapped, muscles tore, and bones shattered. The screams that once filled those chambers are said to still echo in the silence. But the rack was not the only tool of terror. In many castles, prisoners were locked into iron cages barely large enough to sit. Some cages hung from towers, leaving the condemned exposed to weather, birds, and starvation until death finally claimed them. Others were sealed into oubliettes, deep pits where the prisoner was literally forgotten, left in darkness until madness consumed them. At Chillingham Castle, the dungeon tells a story written in blood. Chains still hang from the walls, iron rings rust with age, and the floor bears the stains of centuries-old suffering. Victims here endured iron boots heated until flesh blistered, thumb screws that crushed bone, and spiked chairs designed to tear skin apart with every movement. It is no surprise that visitors often hear anguished cries when they step into this chamber of shadows. In Lancaster Castle, prisoners awaited the gallows after trials held in its cold courtrooms. Many accused were innocent, yet confessions wrung by torture sealed their fate. During the notorious Pendle witch trials of 1612, accused women were held here in damp cells, starved and broken until they admitted to crimes they never committed. Their spirits are said to linger still, furious and unyielding. Warwick Castle holds darker stories of its own. Beneath its towers lies a chamber where shackles remain fixed to the walls. Guides tell of prisoners once chained for months, their cries lost beneath the laughter of feasts above. Some were executed quickly, others slowly. One legend tells of a noble held so long that when the chains were finally removed, they had fused with his bones. Even more horrific were the punishments that did not end in death, but in shame. At Edinburgh Castle, some prisoners were branded or mutilated before being released, their disfigurement a living reminder of the power they had challenged. To walk free was sometimes worse than to die, for they carried the scars of their dungeon with them forever. The cruelty of these prisons did not spare royalty. King James I of Scotland was once held captive for 18 years in English castles, his youth stolen behind stone walls. Though treated better than common prisoners, he lived in a cage of politics, every moment shadowed by fear. Betrayal was not limited to commoners. Even kings tasted the cold bite of chains, and what of those who never left at all? Beneath castles across Britain, mass graves were dug for prisoners who perished in silence. No names were carved, no prayers spoken. Their bones rest beneath the floors, their souls, perhaps, still trapped in endless captivity. Visitors often feel sudden chills in these dungeons, as if unseen hands brush against their skin, or whispers creep into their ears. At Pontefract Castle, where Richard II is believed to have died imprisoned, the dungeons are carved deep into sandstone. The walls still carry scratch marks, perhaps desperate attempts of prisoners to record their names before death claimed them. To stand in those tunnels is to feel the weight of despair pressing in from every side. Dungeons were not always silent. Torture chambers were filled with music of agony, the screech of metal, the crack of bone, the roar of flames. Executioners were not brutes. They were craftsmen of pain, carefully trained to prolong suffering without granting the mercy of death. Each scream was a note in their cruel symphony. The instruments of torture read like inventions from nightmares. Iron maidens, spiked coffins where bodies were pierced slowly. The scavenger's daughter, a device that crushed victims into their own ribs and hips. The wheel, where limbs were shattered one by one. And though some historians argue these devices were rarer than legend claims, the fear of them was very real. Fear itself was a weapon. Some castles used psychological torment as well. Prisoners were told executions would happen at dawn, only to wait days in terror. Others were forced to listen to the screams of fellow captives, knowing they were next. In dungeons, even silence could kill as isolation hollowed out the mind until madness took hold. The cruelty of these punishments was not only about pain, it was about control. Kings and lords used dungeons to remind subjects that disobedience meant not just death, but humiliation, suffering, and being erased from memory. Castles ruled not only with armies, but with fear born in their darkest chambers, and fear lingers. Visitors to Lancaster, Warwick, and Chillingham often leave shaken, swearing they heard voices crying in the dark or felt unseen fingers tug at their clothes. Many refuse to descend into the dungeons at all, certain that the air itself is thick with the suffering of the past. Hauntings here are stronger than anywhere else. At Chillingham, the cries of tortured souls rise like wind through the stone. At the Tower of London, guards have reported apparitions chained to walls, staring with hollow eyes. At Edinburgh, the echo of iron gates slamming still rattles tourists. The ghosts of dungeons do not wander. They wait, trapped as surely as they were in life. And yet, even with such horror, castles thrived. For rulers knew that terror was their sharpest weapon. To show a dungeon, to whisper of torture, was enough to silence rebellion. The darkness below supported the splendor above, the screams beneath fueling the laughter in banquet halls. But cruelty breeds vengeance. The restless dead have long memories, and many believe that the hauntings of castles are strongest because of the torment once suffered within. Dungeons did not just break bodies. They left imprints of agony that can never be erased. For those who dare step into these chambers today, the experience is unforgettable. The air is thick, heavy, almost suffocating. The silence is alive, pressing in on the skin. Each shadow looks like a figure. Each whisper feels like a breath. And some visitors leave not only frightened, but changed, as if something followed them back into the world above. But if dungeons were the darkest heart of castles, there was one place even more dangerous: the throne room above them. For torture may have ruled the underground, but betrayal, ambition, and blood ruled the halls. And in the next chapter, we climb back to the surface, into the glittering halls of royalty, where betrayal and murder wore crowns. Murder in the halls if the dungeons beneath castles whispered with screams. The halls above echoed with betrayal and murder. These were not only rooms of feasts and celebrations, they were stages where ambition struck with daggers, where poisoned cups passed hands beneath glittering chandeliers, and where crowns were won not by loyalty, but by blood. Berkeley Castle carries one of the most infamous stories. Here, in 1327, King Edward II met a death so cruel it is still whispered about in horror. Imprisoned by his own wife, Isabella, and her lover, Roger Mortimer, Edward was held in the castle's chambers. His end came not by sword, but by fire. Legend says a red-hot poker was thrust into his body, leaving no outward wound. The screams were said to echo for miles, and visitors today still report shivering when they stand in the very room where a king burned from within. The Tower of London, once again, stands as a palace of death. It was within its cold halls that Anne Boleyn took her last walk, her every step heavy with betrayal. In 1536, before the eyes of courtiers and executioners, her head was severed with a single sword strike. Blood splashed across the scaffold, staining the tower's memory forever. Yet her ghostly figure, head clasped in her arms, is still seen drifting silently along the chapel, forever reenacting her final walk. Her cousin, Catherine Howard, met the same fate. Arrested for treason, she was dragged screaming down Hampton Court Palace's long gallery. Desperate, she broke free of her captors and sprinted to the chapel, hoping to reach King Henry VIII. Guards caught her before she could beg for mercy. Her cries still echo in that gallery, where visitors often swear they hear footsteps running and a woman's desperate screams cutting through the silence. Not all murders wore the mask of execution. Some came suddenly, in the heat of rage. At Cardiff Castle, tales tell of feasts ending in bloodshed, where nobles clashed with daggers and goblets of wine turned to pools of red. The walls that once rang with laughter still seem heavy, as if they absorbed every violent outburst. Edinburgh Castle is no stranger to royal blood either. James II of Scotland, as a boy, witnessed nobles torn apart by his men during a feast, their bodies dragged out as examples of loyalty's price. The memory scarred him, shaping a reign marked by violence. His castle halls became places of fear, where no one was ever truly safe. At Warwick Castle, darker stories whisper of betrayals over supper tables. Imagine the glow of candlelight on polished silver, the hum of music in the background, and then a poisoned cup passed to a rival, a slow gasp, a collapse onto the stone floor. In castles, every toast carried the risk of death, and every feast could end in silence. Pontefract Castle holds another grim tale, the death of King Richard II. Betrayed and imprisoned by his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, Richard was starved to death within its halls. Though his death lacked the spectacle of execution, it was no less cruel. His ghost is said to drift through the ruins, a gaunt shadow of a king betrayed by blood. Some murders came in the form of sudden uprisings. In castles across Britain, guards turned on their lords, storming chambers in the dead of night. A lord might wake to find armed men bursting into his room, blades flashing, his cries for mercy silenced in seconds. The very men sworn to protect often became executioners, and trust was a luxury few could afford. In some castles, entire families were wiped out in a single night. The walls witnessed massacres where brothers, sisters, and children were slaughtered as power shifted hands. At Dunstanburgh Castle, whispers tell of a noble family betrayed within their own chambers, their bodies left for ravens, while their halls echoed with silence. The banqueting house at Whitehall, though not a castle in the strictest sense, saw perhaps the most famous royal murder of all, the execution of Charles I in 1649. Once King of England, he was led to a scaffold outside, beneath the watchful eyes of thousands. The axe fell, and the crowd gasped as blood sprayed. Castles across the land trembled, for if a king could fall so publicly, no ruler was safe. Murder in castles was not always political. Some were crimes of passion. At Barry Pomeroy Castle, legend speaks of Lady Eleanor Pomeroy, said to have murdered her sister Margaret out of jealousy, locking her in a dungeon to starve. The rivalry of sisters poisoned the halls, and today both are said to haunt the ruins, one in sorrow, the other in guilt. Even in victory, castles became slaughterhouses. When invaders breached the walls, no mercy was shown. Lords were dragged from chambers, women from their beds, children from their cradles. The halls ran with blood, echoing screams that lasted long after the fires were extinguished. These were not noble wars, but brutal purges, where the victors feasted among corpses. Poison was one of the deadliest weapons of castle halls. A goblet of wine, a plate of meat, even a sweet dessert could become a tool of death. Courtiers and nobles lived in constant fear that the next sip might be their last. Some kept tasters at their side, but even then, suspicion clouded every meal. Death came quietly, slipping through the taste of honey and spice. At Ludlow Castle, tales speak of young Edward, Prince of Wales, who died mysteriously within its walls. Was it illness or poison? Historians debate, but the truth may be darker. To many, his sudden death seemed too convenient, his life too valuable a threat to rivals. The castle became his tomb, and whispers claim his shadow still lingers. A boy stolen before his time, halls that once shone with gold tapestries and roaring fires are now silent, but silence itself carries memory. Visitors often report chills when standing in banquet chambers, as if unseen eyes still watch from the corners. In Hampton Court, some say they hear a woman weeping. In Warwick, footsteps follow in empty corridors. Murder leaves marks not only on stone, but on time itself. Each murder was more than a death, it was a message. To kill within a castle was to show that no wall could protect, no crown could shield, and no loyalty could be trusted. Murder in the halls broke more than bodies. It broke faith in the very idea of safety. And so castles became paradoxes, symbols of strength that held only weakness, symbols of protection that harbored death. Every dagger in the dark, every poison goblet, every scream that echoed from banquet to dungeon reminded the world that stone walls could not stop ambition. Today, the grand halls may be empty, the long tables bare, the torches extinguished. But if you stand quietly, some say you can still hear the faint clatter of goblets, the laughter of nobles, and then silence. Sudden, final, heavy. The silence of death. But as dark as these murders were, darker still were the curses they left behind. For in the next chapter, we will step into legends of curses and dark omens, tales of castles doomed not by enemy hands, but by forces far more mysterious, forces that haunted entire bloodlines. Cursed castles, some castles fell to armies, others to betrayal, but there were those that seemed cursed from the very beginning. These were fortresses where misfortune struck generation after generation, where no victory lasted, and where doom clung to the stones like ivy. The people who lived nearby whispered that no man could rule such places without paying a heavy price. Glamis Castle in Scotland is one of the most haunted and cursed castles in Britain. Behind its majestic facade lie stories steeped in darkness. Legends tell of a monstrous child born to the family, hidden away within the castle walls. His spirit, they say, still roams the corridors, a shadowy figure glimpsed only in candlelight. Visitors have reported seeing a deformed presence in mirrors, only for it to vanish when they turn. But Glamis carries more than one curse. It is said that in one chamber, noblemen once gambled endlessly with the devil himself. When they lost, the curse was sealed. That room would forever echo, with ghostly dice rolling across the floor, though no hand throws them. Even today, guests claim to hear the faint sound of cards being shuffled in the silence of night. Dunstanburgh Castle is another fortress wrapped in ill fortune. Built on the Northumberland coast, its towers stand windswept and broken. From the start, it was plagued by betrayal and war. But worse still are the whispers that its foundations were cursed by dark rituals. Locals speak of strange lights on stormy nights, glowing within its ruins, as if souls still wander, unable to leave. At Chillingham Castle, already infamous for its dungeon, the curse takes another form: endless unrest. Nearly every family that lived here suffered tragedy. Wars, murders, and sudden deaths followed one after another. until the castle itself seemed to hunger for blood. Even in modern times, guests report violent hauntings, thrown objects, claw marks on walls, and sudden, chilling touches in the dark. Leap Castle in Ireland, though not British by birth, ties into these dark tales through shared Celtic legends. Its bloody chapel is said to house an elemental spirit, a monstrous shadow accompanied by the stench of rotting flesh. This curse has lingered for centuries, bringing death, madness, and terror to those who dared call the castle home. Its reputation spread across seas, a warning to rulers in Britain who feared similar curses. Back in England, Barry Pomeroy Castle carries its own curse, the restless spirits of two sisters. Eleanor and Margaret, rivals in life, are said to haunt the ruins. Eleanor appears dressed in white, beckoning visitors to follow her into the castle's depths. Margaret, cloaked in blue, is far more sinister, said to lure travelers to their deaths. Some believe the family line was cursed by their blood feud, ensuring no Pomeroy would ever thrive again. Some castles bore curses tied to prophecy. At Raglan Castle, a seer warned that the walls would crumble from within. Years later, during the English Civil War, the castle was indeed destroyed not by outside siege, but by fire set from within its own stronghold. The prophecy fulfilled itself, leaving only ruins as a reminder that destiny had already written its fate. Tintagel Castle, linked with the legend of King Arthur, also bears shadows of curse. Local lore speaks of storms that rise without warning when certain rituals are performed upon its cliffs. Many believe the castle is protected or doomed by ancient Celtic gods. Visitors often describe sudden drops in temperature, gusts of wind that feel like whispers, and an overwhelming sense of being watched by unseen eyes. The Tower of London, beyond its executions and hauntings, is burdened with its own curse, the ravens. Legend claims that if the ravens ever leave, the kingdom itself will fall. For centuries, guards have ensured that these birds remain, clipping their wings if necessary. Yet stories tell of strange events whenever ravens die or vanish. Fires, deaths, or wars soon follow. Some say the curse binds not just the tower, but all of Britain's fate. Bamberg Castle, perched on the North Sea cliffs, is tied to an ancient curse of love and betrayal. The story tells of a princess locked in its towers by her father, only to die of heartbreak. Her spirit became a wailing banshee, shrieking warnings to those who dared claim the castle. Centuries of storms battered its walls, as if nature itself sought to tear it down. In Wales, Conwy Castle bears a tale of cursed construction. Workers claimed that every night their progress would vanish, as if invisible hands tore down what they built. Some whispered that the land was sacred, and no castle should rise upon it. Though the walls eventually stood, the fear of a curse lingered, and the castle saw endless conflict in the years that followed. Curses often struck those who betrayed. At Pontefract Castle, where Richard II was starved to death, locals claimed that his restless soul cursed the fortress. Indeed, the castle later fell repeatedly in wars, its owners suffering ruin after ruin. To this day, its ruins stand as if no restoration will ever succeed, as though the land itself rejects the weight of stone. Windsor Castle, though still standing as a royal residence, has not escaped the shadow of curses. For centuries, its halls have been stalked by the ghost of Henry VIII, whose violent reign left a stain on the crown. His restless spirit is said to slam doors, drag chains, and rage through the corridors at night. Some say his haunting is itself a curse upon the monarchy, a reminder of blood spilled in the name of power. At Carisbrooke Castle, curses were said to be tied to wells. Prisoners lowered into its depths would never return alive, and many whispered that the waters were tainted by spirits. Even animals sent to fetch water refused to go near, pawing at the ground in terror. When Charles I was imprisoned here before his execution, some claimed the curse sealed his fate long before the axe fell. The idea of cursed castles often carried through families. Bloodlines who ruled them found their heirs dying young, wars destroying their fortunes, or madness taking hold of their rulers. It was as if the stone walls absorbed sins, only to repay them across generations. No family could escape, no matter how powerful. Modern visitors sometimes scoff at curses, but many who enter these castles change their minds. Equipment fails in strange ways, cameras refuse to work, and batteries drain instantly. Some leave shaken, swearing they felt invisible hands push them, or voices whisper warnings in their ears. Logic may dismiss curses, but experience often tells a darker story. And what of the ruins that remain untouched? Some castles, though prime for restoration, are left abandoned, locals refusing to rebuild. They say to disturb cursed stones is to invite tragedy, that families who try to live within will be driven mad or die in accidents. The ruins are left to rot, warnings carved in silence. Curses may not be written in books or carved in stone, but they live in the minds of those who tell the stories. Whether through endless tragedy, restless spirits, or strange misfortunes, these castles remind us that power always comes with a price. And some prices echo for centuries, but curses were not the only shadows over castles. For beyond doom and tragedy lay greed, betrayal, and ambition, the endless wars for crowns and kingdoms. In the next chapter, we march into the storm of royal rebellions, where families turned against each other and castles burned with the fury of civil war. Royal rebellions' castles were not only fortresses of defense, they were thrones of ambition. Behind their walls, bloodlines clashed for crowns, fathers turned against sons, and siblings betrayed one another in struggles that drenched the kingdom in war. These royal rebellions left their mark not just on history, but on the very stones of Britain's greatest castles. The Wars of the Roses remain the most famous of all. From 1455 to 1487, two royal houses, Lancaster and York, fought bitterly for the throne of England. Castles across the land became battlegrounds, changing hands with every victory and defeat. Behind each siege lay treachery, and within each hall lurked whispers of betrayal. No fortress was safe, for even its own defenders might open the gates in exchange for survival or power. At Ludlow Castle, the young heirs of the Yorkist cause, Edward and Richard, once sheltered. They were children, pawns in the greater game. When their father, Richard, Duke of York, fell in battle, their fate hung by a thread. Though Ludlow stood firm, the boys were eventually taken, their lives ending in the Tower of London, smothered in their sleep, their innocence crushed beneath the weight of ambition. Warwick Castle, too, played its part, held by Richard Neville, the Kingmaker. He shifted loyalties between Lancaster and York, turning victory to defeat with a single decision. His betrayals brought chaos, his halls echoing with the plotting of kings and queens. When he finally fell at the Battle of Barnet, Warwick's mighty fortress became a monument to the cost of endless rebellion. But rebellion was not confined to dynasties. Fathers and sons clashed in civil wars, castles becoming the prisons of family. At Kenilworth Castle, Simon de Montfort held Henry III's son, the future Edward I, captive during the Second Barons' War. Yet Edward escaped, leading his forces back against de Montfort. Betrayal turned to slaughter, and Kenilworth became soaked in the blood of rebellion. In Scotland, the story was no less violent. Edinburgh Castle was seized and retaken countless times during the Wars of Independence. Robert the Bruce, fighting against English domination, stormed the castle, destroying its defenses so it could never again be used by the enemy. His actions, though strategic, marked Edinburgh as a fortress cursed by endless rebellion, its stones blackened by betrayal. Royal rebellions often came cloaked in personal rivalry. At Stirling Castle, Scottish kings fought not only English invaders, but their own kin. Brothers poisoned each other's wine, uncles plotted against nephews, and sons raised armies against their fathers. The throne of Scotland was never secure, and the castle's halls were heavy with suspicion. The English Civil War of the 17th century brought the deadliest wave of rebellion yet. Royalists loyal to King Charles held castles against Parliament's forces, knowing that surrender meant ruin. At Pontefract Castle, the garrison fought until starvation, disease, and bombardment broke them. When the castle finally fell, Parliament ordered it demolished, stone by stone, so it could never again shelter rebellion. Its ruins still stand as a scar of defiance. During the same war, Corfe Castle in Dorset became the scene of extraordinary loyalty. Lady Mary Banks, with only a small force, held the castle for the king against repeated attacks. Twice she repelled her enemies, earning fame as Brave Dame Mary. Yet in the end, betrayal came from within. A garrison member opened the gates. Corfe fell, not by siege, but by treachery, and was blown apart in Parliament's wrath. In Wales, Carnarvon Castle, built by Edward I as a symbol of dominance, became a rallying point for rebellion. Time and again, Welsh princes rose against English rule, storming its walls and reclaiming it briefly before being crushed. The cycle of rebellion and suppression marked Carnarvon as a fortress both of pride and of endless struggle, its history dripping with defiance. At Nottingham Castle, the story of rebellion intertwined with treachery and legend. Richard the Lionheart, returning from crusade, found his brother John plotting to seize the throne. The castle became the symbol of John's treason, and when Richard stormed it, the walls shook with the fury of royal vengeance. Yet even after Richard's triumph, Nottingham remained a nest of intrigue, cursed by its role in family betrayal. The Tudor dynasty itself was born from rebellion. Henry Tudor, later Henry VII, defeated Richard III at Bosworth in 1485, seizing the crown. Castles like Pembroke, his birthplace, became hallowed sites of rebellion's reward. Yet even his dynasty was not safe. Revolts and conspiracies simmered beneath its walls, proving that every king born of bloodshed risked the same fate. Rebellion often left castles ruined, stripped of power. Raglan Castle, once a jewel of South Wales, was reduced to rubble during the Civil War, its proud towers blasted apart by cannons. Its lords had stood too firmly for their king, and Parliament cursed its stones to ruin. Today, its ruins stand as silent witnesses to loyalty repaid with destruction. Even Windsor Castle, the heart of monarchy, was scarred by rebellion. During the Civil War, it became a prison for royalists and even for the king's supporters. The halls that once echoed with banquets now echoed with chains, the air heavy with despair. Windsor was spared destruction, but its shadowed history bears the mark of betrayal and rebellion. The rebellions did not always end with crowns won or lost. Sometimes they ended with nothing but graves. Castles became cemeteries where bodies piled in courtyards, where blood flowed down steps once walked by royalty. The cost of rebellion was measured not only in power, but in the silence of halls emptied of laughter. Ghosts of rebels are said to linger where they fell. At Pontefract, shadowy figures are seen patrolling ruined walls. At Corfe, visitors report hearing the clash of swords in the night. At Warwick, whispers of plotting still echo through the great hall. Rebellion may have died, but its spirits never left. These rebellions remind us that loyalty in castles was fragile. Every oath of fealty could be broken. Every fortress could turn traitor. Kings and queens who once feasted in triumph often found their own banners torn down, their portraits burned, and their names cursed in the very halls they built. The legacy of royal rebellions is not just in ruins, but in fear. For castles taught rulers that stone walls alone could not protect them. Family could not be trusted. Armies could not be relied upon. Power was fleeting, and ambition was eternal. To walk through the ruins of these castles today is to feel that tension still alive. Stones seem restless, as though waiting for the clash of armies, the thunder of cannons, the cries of betrayal. The air holds the weight of centuries, as though history itself refuses to move on. Yet even after rebellion and ruin, castles were not freed of bloodshed. For the darkest tales were not always of battle, but of secrets, hidden passages, midnight assassins, and plots carried out in shadows. In the next chapter, we descend into those secret corridors, where betrayal moved unseen and murder struck like a whisper in the dark. Secrets and betrayals battles may have decided kingdoms, but it was secrets and betrayals that often decided lives. Within the stone corridors of Britain's castles, whispers carried more power than swords. Hidden passages, secret chambers, and silent assassins turned fortresses of strength into labyrinths of danger. To live within a castle was to live within a web of lies, where every smile could mask a dagger. The Tower of London, long a prison and fortress, was also a nest of secrets. Few remember that its walls hold hidden tunnels, passages built to allow sudden escape or sudden attack. Many prisoners never saw the blade coming, their deaths sealed not in battle, but in private whispers and sealed letters. The tower was less a fortress than a chessboard, where pawns were sacrificed in silence. At Warwick Castle, betrayal often moved quietly. One legend tells of a servant who led assassins through a hidden postern gate, opening the way for enemies to storm the halls. The Lord trusted his staff, but trust was the sharpest weapon turned against him. The betrayal cost lives, and Warwick's walls still seem to hum with the memory of that night. Edinburgh Castle too hides secrets. Beneath its grand stone lies a network of tunnels stretching into the city. During times of rebellion, spies crept through them carrying messages and smuggling weapons. But such secrecy was dangerous. More than one spy was caught, tortured, and executed, their bodies left as warnings. The tunnels remain, silent veins of treachery winding under the castle like roots of poison. At Chillingham Castle, betrayal seeped into the very stones. Prisoners were sometimes released not because of mercy, but because they had turned informants, betraying comrades in exchange for survival. Their screams may have ended sooner, but their names became curses. Today, visitors report hearing phantom whispers in the dungeon, as if confessions are still being forced from unwilling lips. Secrets could destroy kings as easily as common men. At Nottingham Castle, King Edward III once launched a daring betrayal against his mother and her lover, Roger Mortimer. In 1330, his men crept through a hidden passage and seized Mortimer in his chamber. The man who had ruled England through the Queen's bed was dragged out into the night, executed as a traitor. Nottingham's secret tunnels turned the tide of power in a single night. But not all betrayals came through tunnels. Some came through poisoned words. At Hampton Court Palace, the court of Henry VIII thrived on secrets. Servants whispered rumors of Queen's infidelity, rivals schemed to topple enemies, and even a raised eyebrow could mean death. The palace's tapestries have soaked up centuries of plots, their golden threads hiding the darkness beneath. The betrayal of Richard III, though played out on battlefields, began within castle halls. Trusted allies abandoned him, spreading whispers of his supposed crimes. His nephews, the princes in the Tower, were taken into royal custody for safekeeping and never seen again. The mystery of their disappearance remains the greatest secret of all, staining both Richard's name and the Tower stones forever. At Pontefract Castle, secrets brewed in every corner. Prisoners passed coded messages and food, while guards sold information for gold. It was said that even walls had ears, and no word spoken within the castle could be trusted. Betrayal became a currency, traded in shadows for survival. Even the design of castles encouraged secrets. Spiral staircases twisted clockwise, favoring defenders, but also creating blind corners, perfect for ambush. Secret doors opened into chapels, kitchens, or bedchambers, allowing assassins to strike where least expected. To walk alone in a castle at night was to risk never returning. Some castles bore entire legends of betrayal. At Cardiff Castle, stories tell of noblemen slain by their own kin, their blood spilled over disputes of inheritance. The greed of family turned hall into battlefield, and betrayal was etched into every stone. To this day, visitors say they feel unease within the keep, as though unseen eyes still judge them. Secrets often carried curses. At Glamis Castle, where whispers of monsters and hidden heirs circulate, locals believed a terrible family secret was locked within its walls. The truth, whatever it was, never left the castle, but the sense of hidden sin lingered across generations. Even now, rooms remain sealed, doors never opened, as if the secret inside is too dangerous to release. Betrayals often ended in sudden death. At Stirling Castle, one nobleman was stabbed in his own bed by trusted companions. At Windsor, servants conspired to poison their lords. Castles were not sanctuaries, they were traps, where every locked door could hide an assassin. But perhaps the greatest betrayals were not of lords and kings, but of the people who served them. During sieges, garrisons often surrendered when bribed by enemies. Servants, desperate for survival, opened gates at night. In exchange for food or freedom, they sacrificed their masters. Some were rewarded, others slaughtered anyway. Their ghosts, many believe, still walk, forever marked as traitors. Even love was twisted into betrayal. Queens accused of adultery often faced the blade, though many were innocent. Lovers, real or imagined, were dragged into dungeons, tortured until they confessed. The betrayal of love, used as a political weapon, became as deadly as steel. Castles became graveyards, not just of bodies, but of hearts. Secrets lived not only in the past, but in the present. Modern explorers of castles sometimes stumble upon sealed doors, bricked passageways, or forgotten rooms. What lies behind them remains unknown. Some whisper that these chambers hold skeletons, literal or figurative, and that the families who once ruled feared the truth being exposed even centuries later. In some castles, betrayal seems to replay itself endlessly. Visitors to Hampton Court report hearing footsteps in the gallery where Catherine Howard begged for her life. At Nottingham, people speak of shadowy figures moving through tunnels that should be empty. These hauntings are not random. They are secrets refusing to stay buried. The true terror of secrets and betrayals is their invisibility. A sword you can see, an army you can fight. But a whisper, a hidden door, a false smile, these strike when defenses are down. They remind us that the deadliest weapon inside a castle was not the blade, but the secret. And so, castles became paradoxes once more. Mighty on the outside, fragile within. Betrayal rotted their cores, turning stone fortresses into graves of loyalty. Every hall, every chamber carried the weight of lies, and every ghost still lingers, not because of death, but because of treachery. Yet even secrets and betrayals are not the final darkness of castles. For beyond lies and daggers waits the greatest shadow of all, death itself. In the final chapter, we will walk through the legacy of haunted ruins, where all the battles, betrayals, and curses have collapsed into silence, and where the dead still refuse to rest. Haunted Ruins time has a way of silencing cannons, of burying swords beneath the earth, but it cannot erase the echoes of blood spilled inside Britain's castles. Once strongholds of kings and battlefields of rebellion, many now lie in ruins. Yet their stones still whisper, their shadows still move, and their halls are filled not with lords, but with ghosts. Haunted ruins are the last testimony of centuries of violence, betrayal, and despair. The Tower of London is perhaps the most infamous of all. Tourists walk its cobbled paths by day, but when night falls, the spirits of its dead prisoners stir. The cries of Anne Boleyn, executed for treason and adultery, are said to echo through the chapel. Guards whisper of seeing her headless form drifting through the Tower Green. The blood of betrayal is not forgotten here. It lingers, restless. At Chillingham Castle, screams are said to echo from the torture chambers, where prisoners once begged for mercy that never came. The Blue Boy, a child murdered within its walls, is reported to appear at night, glowing faintly as he searches for justice that history never granted. The ruined halls are alive with agony, as if the stones themselves remember. Warwick Castle, though preserved, is haunted by its past. Visitors speak of cold drafts in the Great Hall, footsteps following them along the ramparts, and whispers in empty towers. The Kingmaker may be gone, but the betrayals he orchestrated still haunt the air, carried like smoke from fires long extinguished. Pontefract Castle, demolished after the Civil War, is still feared. Shadows move among its ruins, guards report strange lights, and locals refuse to walk near its remains after dark. Some believe it is haunted by those who starved during the final siege, their souls tethered to the castle that abandoned them to death. At Edinburgh Castle, tourists laugh by day, but few linger at night. It is said the spirit of a headless drummer appears before disaster, beating a silent warning. Soldiers claim to have heard phantom footsteps in the dungeons, where prisoners once rotted. The city may bustle outside, but within the walls, time has frozen in terror. Corfe Castle, blown apart by betrayal, now stands as a skeleton on the Dorset Hills. Visitors tell of women's cries carried by the wind, believed to be Lady Mary Banks mourning her fallen defenders. Others see ghostly soldiers standing watch among the broken stones, eternally guarding a fortress already lost. Even Windsor Castle, the proud heart of the monarchy, holds shadows. The ghost of King Henry VIII is said to stalk its corridors, dragging his ulcerated leg with each heavy step. Queen Elizabeth I is rumored to appear near the library, her spirit restless in the castle where secrets shaped an empire. No amount of royal ceremony can cleanse centuries of haunting. Carnarvon Castle, symbol of English domination in Wales, carries darker echoes. Some hear the clash of swords at night, as though the Welsh princes still rise in defiance. Others speak of phantom torches flickering along the walls, a reminder that rebellion, though crushed, was never silenced. The ruins are not just stone, they are memory itself. Glamis Castle, with its locked rooms and whispered curses, holds perhaps the darkest legend. Locals tell of a secret child, hidden away in a chamber, whose monstrous fate was concealed for generations. The castle itself seems alive with the weight of this secret, its very silence a form of haunting. Some truths, it seems, are too terrifying even for history. Nottingham Castle, rebuilt many times, remains bound to betrayal. The tunnels beneath still stir unease, footsteps in the dark, the sound of distant voices where none should be. Those who enter sometimes speak of being watched, as though the ghosts of conspirators still plot within. The rebellion that once toppled kings has never ended in spirit. Kenilworth Castle, now a ruin of romance and rebellion, carries softer hauntings. Visitors see a woman in Tudor dress, believed to be Amy Robsart, whose death cast a shadow over Robert Dudley's ambition. Whether she walks in sorrow or accusation, no one can say, but her presence is undeniable, tied forever to betrayal's touch. Stirling Castle, proud and fierce, holds legends of murdered nobles. Guests report cold hands touching theirs in empty corridors, or the sudden sense of being followed. Some claim the apparitions are soldiers, others lords betrayed by kin. In Stirling, the line between history and haunting is blurred by centuries of blood. Raglan Castle, shattered by war, is home to more than ruin. A phantom horseman is said to ride across its grounds, his armor clanking as if heading to a battle already lost. Children speak of ghostly figures waving from broken towers, though no one stands there. The ruins breathe with lives that ended in fire and betrayal. Hampton Court Palace, glittering by day, is a chamber of horrors by night. Catherine Howard's ghost is said to rush down the gallery, screaming for mercy, just as she did before her execution. Servants have seen her shadow dart past them, her pleas echoing across centuries. Betrayal turned her love into death, and her spirit refuses to be silenced. Cardiff Castle carries whispers of slaughtered kin, the echoes of family betrayal that stained its walls. Visitors feel sudden chills, hear sobs in the wind, and sense unseen eyes watching them. The ruins of its keep seem heavy, as though weighed down by guilt too great for stone to bear. Even Pembroke, birthplace of Henry Tudor, holds shadows of its own. Locals claim to see armored figures marching along the battlements at night as though protecting a child destined to become king. Yet others say the spirits mourn, for every crown born from rebellion carries curses of blood. What unites all these ruins is not just stone, but silence. It is in the silence that the past lives on. No bird song can truly soften the weight of betrayal. No sunrise can erase the memory of screams. Castles may be ruins, but they are ruins that breathe, that remember, that judge. To walk among them is to feel the centuries pressing close. You are never truly alone. Each footstep stirs the ghosts. Each breath wakes the past. You may leave the ruins behind, but they will not leave you. For these castles are not dead, they are waiting. And so we end where we began, in the darkness of Britain's castles, where haunted stones, bloody battles, and royal betrayals converge into a legacy of fear. The walls are broken, the kings are gone, but the shadows remain. The greatest terror of all is not that these stories are myths, it is that they are true. And if you dare visit these ruins, listen closely. The dead may still have something to say.